Hello, so welcome back to another sketchbook video where we're gonna fill in another spread in this little cheap sketchbook that I got from Target years ago, but there's gonna be a trend of me getting a lot of random art supplies from Target. So the theme of today's video is how to make your art look less dead, because I feel like there are a lot of us artists who get to the point where our art starts to look good, but at the same time, maybe you don't have the exact type of life or essence of liveliness in it that you would like. So today we're going to talk about how to make your art feel more alive. So previously on last week's spread, we did a spread where we are on an airplane and it's more of a monochromatic black and white, and I don't really feel like this looks that dead, but at the same time, it's kind of less of a colorful spread and more of just a chill, like limited palette type of situation. But for the next one, we want to bring something a little bit more lively to just remind people that there's a variety of different spreads we're working with in this sketchbook. So anyway, let's get going to see how to make your art look less dead. When I'm gonna first start off with this sketchbook spread, we're gonna just lay down the composition and avoid symmetry. The reason why you wanna avoid symmetry is because unevenness creates a greater sense of an organic feeling. So by avoiding symmetry, we're going to, for this spread, place the main subject on the left and stuff on the right, because for this spread, I'm kind of doing it for when you disembark a plane or when you leave the airport of a country that you go to. You're gonna be introduced to all of these signs, languages, people, culture, and I want to create that feeling of just being like, whoa, I'm in a different world, or feelings of shock or being impressed or something of a wow factor. So I'm going to not place the character in the center for once, because I feel like for a lot of my previous spreads, while they were not totally symmetrical, I still placed the character right in the middle, but for this one, we're gonna just place her on the left and all of the stuff on the right, which creates a sense of direction because the character is looking to the right and we see all of this stuff here, and the natural progression of the sketchbook is moving from left to right. So when we are going to flip the page, it's still kind of going to help continue the feeling that this spread is evoking, where the girl is looking to the right. We're going to turn the page on the right side, and that's kind of just more of a Western storytelling technique, where if you want to feel like a story is progressing, you want to keep the momentum from left to right, versus Eastern storytelling is from right to left. So for the sake of this sketchbook, we're gonna do it from left to right. So the next thing, if you want to introduce more feelings of life to your drawings or your art, is to play more with emotions. So the reason why I find that a lot of people tend to not include any emotions in their art is not because they don't want to, it's just because they're not playing enough with eye shapes, mouth shapes, stretching and squashing of different facial features, and they don't play with different face angles other than just like a frontal face angle or maybe a side profile view. I think if you want to go for the most, dynamic type of face angle, 3/4 is the most basic you can get while still incorporating some sense of depth, because you are trying to basically say that the side of the face that is, facing away from you is further back in space, while there is still a part of the face that is facing towards you. So moving on to coloring. When you are trying to introduce colors into your sketchbook or your art book, whatever type of book you're working in now, use vibrant colors, which I would assume is a given because muted colors, pastel colors can still create a softer, subtle appearance with having its own type of life. But, sometimes when you want to create that wow factor or something that stands out a little bit more, something that feels a little bit more punchy and lively, you should try to stick to colors that skew more towards primary colors like red, blue, yellow. I'm not saying that you have to use those colors exactly, but you want to choose colors that maybe lean towards those a little bit more. So for this spread, we're going to try to stick more with reds and blues. I personally like playing with reds and blues because when you mix them together, they create purple, and I feel like that's personally my favorite color to use in any sketchbook spread. You might have noticed in the previous spreads, I predominantly use purple as a form of shading, which I will continue to do so in this spread, but I will also primarily be using blues and reds a little bit more actively compared to the other ones. But I felt like, the previous spread was more of a muted, like grayscale with pops of blue look. But for this one, let's do the complete opposite, where it's less quiet feeling and a little bit more loud feeling. And usually when you want to create that, more extreme feeling of life, that's when you want to use those colors like reds, yellows, blues. But I would say if you want to go even more extreme, reds and yellows are usually even more wowy, because I don't know why I said wowy, but like wow factor, I guess, because they create feelings of a warning. Like you might have noticed a lot of warning symbols are red and yellow, but they don't always have to insinuate something negative. It can still be something that's shocking or bold, and that's also why a lot of people on YouTube use red and yellow as their form of text or thumbnail colors. So you want to create depth with colors as well. So one of the things that I've definitely talked about a lot in my previous videos was using warm colors to bring things forward and cool colors to bring things backwards in space. So cool colors tend to be more relaxing and they are a lot easier on the eyes, which is why when you look at a spread with both warm colors and cool colors, it's a lot easier for your eyes to pick up the warm, bold colors first, and then the cooler colors kind of later on. But with that, it's also going to help create a feeling of depth because those cool colors can be the form of shading, which makes it feel like an object is a bit more backwards in space. So for the shading of this character, we're going to use blue for the backgrounds, or I guess the background elements of the hair, or the hair that is further back in space, or anything that is kind of more in the background. We are going to shade those with blue, and anything that is more frontal, we're going to shade with, reds or warmer colors. And this is kind of just a very basic coloring guideline I used a lot when I was life drawing. If you're ever studying a person in real life and you want to create that extra oomph and kind of play with things a little bit more in the color world, try to shade with blue, maybe even purple if you want to, and see what happens, because you will definitely make it feel like this object that you are painting or coloring is more three-dimensional instead of just using like black or the darker version of that original color. So another thing I have seen a lot in my Patreon email consultations is a lot of people tend to just shade with the darker color of the original color that they use. So if you choose a base color, you tend to probably just go back to your color picker and then just maybe choose one that is a darker shade, which, that's fine, that's valid. I've done it, everyone does it to some degree. But if you want to create something that is a little bit more vibrant, has a little bit more life, and maybe doesn't have to look so natural feeling, and you still want to create some interest in your art, try to use a color that is on the cooler side, like again, blue, purple, somewhere in that world, instead of just always using the darker shade of your original base color. So on top of coloring, there's also line weight, which is pretty important because if you are an illustrator or somebody who draws a lot, you probably rely on your line art as what holds your drawing together. Like this is the foundation to your artwork. But if you don't know where to start with playing with line weight, you want to have thicker lines be what is in the foreground. So if you notice, a lot of the things that I want to pop in this drawing are primarily drawn with with thicker lines, they are bolder, there's more contrast in the foreground, whereas anything with thinner lines, things I don't really want to be as front facing and maybe more in the background, those will be used with thinner lines and they have less contrast in them as well. Like I'm not having as much like white and dark colors with those, but anything that is kind of more up front, you will have more, you know, you will see a little bit more white space and more darker spaces, but also again, line arted with thicker lines. So anything that is bolder, darker, thicker will naturally feel more prominent and stand out, which makes it feel like it is closer to us. So if you want to ever draw anything that just feels, you know, closer to you in the three-dimensional space, outline it with a thicker line versus the ones that are in the background would be with thinner lines. And then as we're getting to like these random objects that I'm kind of throwing out, like signs and stickers and animals and stuff from the countries, I want to randomize their positions. You know, when you are snapping things to a grid-like lined up position, it can create a more stiff feeling, which can be fine and have its own effect, because I get it. There's some sketchbook spreads that thrive off of that feeling of creating a list. But for this one, we want to kind of just make it a little bit more of a wild card feeling. So that's why we're kind of throwing things out there, placed in a variety of different angles. They're in different positions. They're not lined up in any specific order, and they are overlapping each other. They are behind one another or whatever. This helps make things, again, feel more natural and goes back to what I talked about with avoiding symmetry. You're just having a lot of different objects thrown out there in space and floating around, overlapping each other, which makes it feel a little bit more natural. So then lastly, I will say if you want to create a composition or drawing or something that feels like it has more life, you should have a focal point of some sort. Sometimes you don't always need a focal point, especially if you're creating something like a pattern or something that has a lot of repetition and you don't have to look at this one thing there. But sometimes I feel like a focal point, if it gives your eye something to look at, that's kind of what helps give a feeling of life, because you're noticing this one thing out of the others, which is what our eyes tend to do in reality. You know, when you look around, you're probably going to subconsciously notice certain things more than others. So for this spread, of course, everything kind of draws back to the main character, the girl on the left, and all of the objects floating around in space, while they are all randomized, they all kind of have a line that leads back to her. Like they are all kind of placed in a perspective where their horizon line will be drawn back to her. And on top of that, we are kind of leaving a slight white glow around her to just kind of, again, emphasize that she is the star, the spotlight of this spread. And also on top of that, she's just also the only main character here, and everything else is just random objects, elements, and things, which makes it easier when you have two completely different subjects on the spread. So yeah, all of these things ultimately imitate life, not literally, but the way that we approach life and look at these things around us exhibit these practices that we don't subconsciously think about in our day-to-day, but being aware of these notes and bringing it back to your art can still evoke feelings of life subconsciously to us and the viewer of whoever looks at your sketchbook spread. So yeah, this was a very fun and wild sketchbook spread for me to do. It was also the first time I used gouache, or I guess not really the first time, but I used it a little bit more importantly or primarily because I used it as the background colors. But gouache is really great for if you want to overlap some paint and you need it to dry faster. It's really good for that, so highly recommend it. Although the brand I use is just a basic Target brand, so not sure if I recommend that, but you know, for this sketchbook spread or this art book spread, it did what it needed to do. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. If you would like for me to even like do a video where I talk about the different art supplies I've been using in the sketchbook, because the supply list is growing, feel free to let me know down in the comments below, and I would be glad to do a more proper review of the mediums I've been working with if you are interested. But yeah, until then, I will see you all in the next one.